Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Simeon Morrow, Executive Communications Coaching, and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please turn off your camera and microphone and/or go to the Facebook Live video feed, the link to which I'll now place in the chat room. For a better experience, please turn off your microphone and set your video to gallery view. Tonight, our featured guest is University Professor Patrik Aspers, Chair of the Research Institute of Sociology at the University of St. Gallen. Also joining us tonight is Dr. Lino Rivera, Professor of Music at St. Mary's College of California. Professor Aspers, welcome.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks a lot for having me at your show.
Patrik, so can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I'm more than happy to do. I'm a Swedish citizen, but I live in another small neutral country, Switzerland, since 3 years, and I'm 51 years old. I was born in a small town called Gävle, north of Stockholm in Sweden, 200 kilometers north of Stockholm. It was very kind of working class city, and my background is also very much like a working class background, which is not uncommon for a sociologist. I did my undergraduate study at Stockholm University. I didn't know very much about sociology or basically anything, so I started out with economics and was a bit dissatisfied with that, I should say. And eventually I turned out that well, there was a course in sociology, there was also a course in psychology, but sociology was much more interesting. So that's where how I came in contact with sociology. I was not searching for it. It was more like drifting to something else, away from economics, I should say.
Patrik, can you tell us more about that working class family? You said that it's common that sociologists come from a working class family. What do you mean exactly? And how was that then when you started that sociology course that you said, oh, this is for me?
Yeah, I mean, common in the sense that it's perhaps more common than other academic disciplines to have a working class background in sociology, because ever since the starting point of sociology has been related to work life and condition for people. I mean, Karl Marx is of course seen by quite a few as a classic sociologist, and of course his study was about workers' rights and the possibility of even a revolution. I mean, and that has primed sociology quite a lot. So there is a long tradition of that. And to me, I mean, both my parents, none of them had experience of going to even gymnasium. So my father was an electrician, and my mother worked as an office clerk, really, and was at home when I was a child. So it was very much like a background of and everyone living in my neighborhood had basically the same background. Some of them had parents that had been to university, but none had a higher degree, like a doctorate degree. I didn't really know what it was until quite late, I should say.
Okay, so Patrik, can you tell us a little bit about this field of sociology? I've been told by some academics that they call it a weak field, that it's kind of a pseudoscience. It's not like economics. It's kind of something where people talk about people and their relations and how they feel. Tell us a little bit about this field, and I imagine that it can be very popular. For instance, we hear about I think there was some years ago a professor at Columbia University in New York City who was studying gangs and then taking part in gang lifestyle. But I imagine that there are, just like any group, any organization, there are a lot of different kinds of sociology. Tell us a little bit about this field.
Yeah, it's. I mean, quite a few disciplines have a domain. Like economics tend to have the economy as a domain. Political science tend to have the state and politics as a domain, and so on and so forth. Whereas sociology doesn't have a domain at all. It includes everything. So you find sociology studying everything from gangs, politics, the economy, social relations, family, and so on and so forth, environment. I mean, there's no limitation to what you can study, which of course means that it's a bit blurry when you try to describe what sociologists do. But what every sociologist tend to do is to study the social. And what do we mean by the social? Which typically means relations, for example, between two people. There's a tie between them, and this tie affects both of them. So they are interacting with one another and now co-constituting one another. Typically, you see this in a family, that you're affected by your upbringing, your parents and your friends, and then later in the school, work life, and so on and so forth. So you're never an atom which operates like the Cartesian ego, for example. You're always tied up with others, and what they do affect you, and vice versa. So this is a kind of the core element of sociology, and this you do at the macro level, for example, between organizations, that organizations are tied up and relate to other organizations, and also individuals. So you can scale it up and down, so to speak, this social dimension.
And can you tell us a little bit about when you began studying sociology, like you said, as an undergraduate student, what your understanding of the field was then, and kind of what it is now as a practitioner? And just to give a little bit of context, when I was taking courses at the University of Vienna, I signed up for the entry-level sociology course.
Yeah.
And the professor told the class, well, we'll pretty much study, whatever you want to. What are your interests? And then I had that feeling, well, where's the core? Where's this? I thought, we'd have to do a real course. But then I took another course called Sociology for Business Students. And suddenly they were introducing us to how sociology could be applied in business and management. And it seemed to me, to give me a leg up on everything else. It really seemed to be very, very important knowledge that could be applied to something, and that I had an advantage where other people had not taken the course didn't.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned business, because I think, sociology has been an export discipline. That is, the ideas developed within sociology has been exported to other disciplines to larger extent than vice versa, I would say. So, for example, the idea that we currently talk about network society, that's largely theories and also methods, quantitative methods above all, which have been developed within the discipline of sociology, that is by sociologists, and later on that has been used by other disciplines. Of course, the idea of network comes essentially from anthropology, but it was via the sociological development around people at Harvard University in particular, that this could be spread also, and today it's used, for example, frequently in business studies, even in economics, and obviously in sociology. So the toolbox that sociology offers, I think the toolbox and the perspective of the social is really what unites sociologists. And toolbox is here, should be seen broad enough to include both qualitative and quantitative methods, because you find all kinds of sociologists doing all kinds of sociology using different methods. But again, there is something that keeps us together to make it that it makes sense to speak about sociology. I recognize a sociological analysis, or I recognize a sociology when I see him or her at a conference, for example, without really knowing that this is a person who has a sociological background.
Can you elaborate? How do you recognize these people?
Well, I think it's of course this is something that you learn you learn the ropes by being in the trade. And I think one of the dimensions is how you frame the questions. Which type of questions do you ask? And also, of course, how do you approach the problem? Typically, then you use a certain type of theories and assumptions above all, which goes back to this what I talked about, this social, that there's something that affects something and the actors or the organizations are never acting in solitude. They're always either together or affected by others or constrained by others. So this is interplay between those you study, be it individuals, families, organizations, or even states.
So in other words, you can tell a sociologist because a sociologist is really speaking from both sides, from many different perspectives, and how those perspectives might influence each other.
Yeah. And this kind of the social core is really what singles sociology out. I mean, if you talk to a psychologist, he or her they will be speaking about the individual characteristics and so on, and put the focus of the explanation there, whereas the sociology will probably speak about the in-betweenness, so to speak, the tie between actors and how that constrains the role in society, the class position or something like that, which, so to speak, explains his or her, the individual actor's behavior.
Wow. So Patrik, can you tell us about how you got from that first undergraduate course in Sweden to being the chair of sociology at St. Gallen University? Tell us about what you do now, and what is your branch of psychology? Do you follow Swiss gangs around?
Yeah, well, not me personally, but we were trying to launch a project here, and we hope we'll get funding for this in the spring on marketplaces. So we'll be studying physical, classical marketplaces, like the typical the square in most cities. You have it's called the marketplace, and also digital marketplaces or online marketplaces. So we try to make it very historical oriented study. So we have done a review of the text. That's every text that talks about marketplaces, not every, but quite a lot, several hundred texts, which we talk about marketplace in order to understand what it is. And we have defined marketplaces, and then we want to understand how they function. And so it's a very kind of basic research. But it will be an empirical study or several empirical studies on several different marketplaces, both online and physical marketplaces. So this is what we will be doing, what I do now, in addition to the topic of today, uncertainty reduction, which is still my main focus, I would say, today. And so you also asked about the background, or?
Sure. So did you know from the beginning in sociology you wanted to go into uncertainty reduction, or that you wanted to do markets, or how did that all evolve? As I understand, when you're a bachelor and you have to write your bachelor's thesis, you already want to have an idea kind of about what you want to write your master's thesis and your doctoral thesis about.
Yeah. No,
was that clear for you, or did you stumble upon it?
No, it was far from clear. And I think that's also one of the advantages being in sociology, that, I mean, all doors are essentially opened and to you. It was just a strike of luck that I ended up in Stockholm University, which at the graduate program there, which then had a really, really good department. It still has an excellent department, but the people who were there were doing different things. There was like a nice tension. A field was opened up between actors, 3 or 4 professors who were really good doing completely different things. And Richard Svedberg was my supervisor, Peter Hedström, Jörn Arne was there, and Barbara Hobson. I think these 4 people did different things and showed like an opportunity structure for us younger scholars. And I studied a classic economist, Alfred Marshall, and I saw that he wrote quite a lot about markets. And from his work, I departed and went into the field of markets by doing a study on fashion photographers, the market for fashion photographers.
So Patrik, when you talk about these markets, are they also part of economics, like you said, or is it, so you would consider yourself a social economist, or?
Yeah. I mean, I would call an economic sociologist focusing on the economy. I mean, I do a lot of other things too, but this is my main focus, and markets, of course, are perhaps the most central institution in the economy. And I think at least when I started, and still to some extent, they were not so much studied by the economists. They were more assumed that there are markets, but they were not the central focus of their research attention, at least. So what I and several others tried to do was to see, okay, what is a market and what types of market, what forms does it come in, and does it really matter that there are different market forms? So I spent quite a few years developing theories and analyzing different forms of market, like basic forms.
And I remember reading in the handbook, I think it's Handbook of Social Economics by Professor Richard Svedberg, where he kind of goes through a little history of, like you said, of these markets where you get, finally, in the beginning, you had people just making enough product for themselves and for their family. And then from the moment you had a surplus that you wanted to meet with others, with foreigners, and even if you weren't friends, you wanted to start trading. And then he tracks that up to the medieval fairs in Europe, where you'd kind of be diplomats in a different country trading, and then up to the markets we have today. So is this more or less what you're contributing to?
Yeah, I mean, not the historical perspective so much. I think there's so many great historians who have done this studies of this kind. Fernand Braudel, I would really put an emphasis, or if someone has an interest in studying this. So what I have done is to study contemporary markets primarily, but more as forms. So, for example, I analyze markets in which people gain identity. So, for example, fashion photographers tend to gain an identity as being seller, and they get a status as being high status photographers or low status photographers, depending on what the kind of pictures they take, and above all, with whom they work. So, for example, those who work for American Vogue or Italian Vogue, they gain a lot of status as photographers, which means that they can work with the best fashion models and so on and so forth, and then further their careers. Whereas for others who work with kind of not so fashionable or high status magazines, don't get access to the same models and don't get access to the same clothes and so on and so on, which means that they have more of a problem getting their career going, so to speak. And eventually it usually ends up with less money, these people who have less status, whereas those with high status. So this is the classic Matthew effect that we know from the Bible. To those who get something tend to get even more, so to speak. That's quite it's a common observation. It goes in academia too, and many other fields as well.
Fantastic. So before we get into your book and continue a little bit the conversation about your work also in the fashion industry, why don't we go into this book, Risk, Uncertainty, and Profit, published in 1921 by the Iowa economist Frank Knight. He published this book in Iowa City, I guess after World War I, right before the Great Depression hit the United States, in the Midwest, where they consider it the breadbasket. That's where all of the agriculture in the US gets traded, on LaSalle Street in Chicago. Can you tell us a little bit about getting acquainted with this book, which I believe you would like this book to become, as I understand it, more of a central book, a central discourse in socioeconomic thought. Tell us about this, getting acquainted with it, and what exactly is disclosed, what this book is all about.
Yeah, this is an important book, and I think this is how it looks. I think everyone who has a stake in economics knows this book. It doesn't mean that every economist has read it. As a matter of fact, I was at the conference talking, I was invited at an economics conference talking about uncertainty. And of course, they talk about night and uncertainty, those people. And then I asked, the first question was, okay, how many of you have actually read this book? And no one raised his or her hand. So it's not that it's well read, but it's well known. And economists tend to say that, well, everything that is older than 20 years is not worth reading. I mean, it's an exaggeration, but still. So the book is, as you mentioned, it's more now than 100 years old. And of course, it means that it was Frank Knight's dissertation. So it was actually written quite a few years before. And the core of it is a thought experiment. And this thought experiment assumes that actors have free knowledge, that they know everything, and there are no transaction costs, and which essentially means that you can trade with everyone wherever this person sits in the world, which of course is a fiction. This is not the reality, but remember, he puts it up as a thought experiment. And what he then says, with a lot of assumptions about actors, information, and so on and so forth, is that under these conditions, where you can put probabilities on all outcomes, there will be no profit. Because as soon as there is a profit opportunity, everyone knows sees this opportunity at the same time, meaning that it so to speak disappears as soon as it appears, if you put it that way. So this is the bulk of the book. In the middle of the book is the largest chunk, but it's prefaced by a good discussion and ends by a discussion about uncertainty, because he says this thought experiment is only a thought experiment, that it is not reality. And what the thought experiment is about risk. Risk is calculable. You can calculate the risk with probabilities. But he says, in reality, we operate under conditions of uncertainty. So where there is no way we can do this type of calculation. We don't have full knowledge. People have different preferences. They're constrained by being located in various places, and so on and so forth. That is, he speaks about reality, and reality is different from this thought experiment. And it's in reality, the entrepreneur has the possibility to make profit, because we don't know everything. It's uncertain. So uncertainty is, so to speak, the real life conditions, but it's also the condition for profit. And this is an interesting aspect. And I think that the book somehow got a second wave after the financial crisis 2007-8, when a lot of economists realized that, well, maybe there's something more to it. We seem to have all the calculations that it shouldn't happen anything, and then suddenly there was this crash. So it wasn't foreseen in the framework of risk. It couldn't be accounted for in the risk with the risk analytic framework. So you had to turn to something else. And after that, uncertainty has become much more of a larger theme. And obviously, the COVID is yet another example of a situation where uncertainty just goes up.
Patrik, so turning back to this idea of profit, of course, you use that magic word entrepreneur, which among economists and sociologists, I believe, is kind of the hero figure who is able to, transform society into some kind of better place by taking risk. I can still hear my mom saying, well, those people who founded the company, they get paid a lot of money because they took the risk. They get paid more because they took more risk. And so I wanted to ask you about this idea about profit. So are you referring to what they say in classic economics is the supply and demand curve, and that it's out of balance at the beginning when something is at a very high cost, or when somebody is in the game already and they kind of strike gold, they're getting paid much more for their product because there's no competition at the moment. And so more than earning so-called accounting profit, where they get money back for whatever and they get paid for their hours, they make a profit because they get kind of a windfall. They get extra money on top. Is that what you mean? What do you mean by profit?
Yeah, I mean exactly this is, I mean, we can stay within the economics framework to talk about profit. That's something that is kind of a surplus to just maintaining your business, so to speak. And I think entrepreneurship is frequently about having more knowledge than others. For example, being in a broker's position. And this is the classic situation where tradesmen knew the price in one village and also the price in another village. So they could profit from having more knowledge than those villages living in village A and those living in village B, not knowing the price of the other. But if you stay in between, so to speak, having one leg in each of the villages, you can profit by trading the right things from one to another. And this is the typical situation where the entrepreneur comes in and does something new, adds something to the playground, so to speak. Makes extra profit.
Fantastic. And so in Knight's book, then he is arguing more or less that against this classical economics model where everybody knows everything. And so one trader is trading the same thing if I'm trading corn, my corn is the same as the other guys. We come from the same background. People like us as much. So he's saying more or less, no, that's never going to be the case. And it's in all of those gray areas where real things happen before everybody kind of jumps on the train and starts doing the same thing. And then nobody's making a profit anymore. Is that right?
Yeah. And the basic assumption here is that under uncertainty, there is less knowledge, meaning that it's actually this kind of lack of knowledge is the precondition for profit. That is that not everyone has the same knowledge. We have different knowledges. We make different interpretations of the world, and thereby making different actions, and also the outcomes are therefore different for us. But it's of course interesting too that this what I talked about, the bulk of the book or the core of the book has been lifted out and put essentially into textbooks. And this has been the canon of what later became the neoclassic economics, for example, in Paul Samuelson's textbooks and many other textbooks following his textbook, until today, essentially. So there has been, for some time, the textbook version was quite close to what economists were doing, but increasingly over the last couple of decades, there is a gulf opening up between what it says in the textbook and what practitioners and also, I mean, what academics, economists are doing. They do different things than the introductory books to economics 101, so to speak, suggest that the economy is about and how you should analyze it. But for a long time, Knight's ideas were implemented in textbooks and was the core of economics, actually. But again, it was this bulk that was lifted out, whereas the context of it was forgotten in a sense. But increasingly people tend to remember that, okay, maybe there was something he wrote before the first couple of chapters, and also of course the main idea of the book is about uncertainty, not about risk.
Patrik, and when did this book by Frank Knight catch your eye? Were you always aware of it, or was it after the 2008 financial crisis, or were you already looking into this uncertainty reduction at that time? When did that become a part of such a central part of what your work is?
I think I was aware of the book since I did my undergraduate studies in economics and economic history. I knew the book, but I hadn't read it. So it was only like 5-6 years ago that I took a careful read and read the entire book and made detailed notes. So it was always something that I wanted to do. But to read such a book, it takes some time. If you're serious about understanding and trying to also have a critical reflection with you when you read, and not just skim it, so to speak.
And so and tell us, so then when you started looking into this uncertainty reduction, have you become known for that? Has it become after, for instance, when this COVID thing happened, was it, are you now one of the reference people talking about this, or has it caught on?
I think I published one text on uncertainty reduction in 2018, and it has got some recognition. And I haven't said so much about COVID myself. I really don't have any special knowledge about COVID. What I've talked about is in other interviews about, for example, work life in relation to COVID, but not the COVID as such. But of course, what I'm currently writing is a book on uncertainty reduction, which I think and hope will get the recognition. But usually in academia, it takes many years to write a book, then it takes many years to publish a book, and then it takes many years before it actually gets recognition. So it's a kind of long, the time horizon is a completely different one than the COVID, which develops every week, so to speak, or every month at least, in different directions, you may say.
Okay, so let's take a look at the, here's the manuscript, the title page, Uncertainty Reduction, Coping with a Complex World by Patrik Aspers. There it is. So tell us a little bit about this, Patrik. Tell us about when you started working on this book and what you've learned since.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And let me also say that if anyone in the audience have a question, just don't hesitate to shoot it off. I guess if Simeon allows it. Yeah. Thanks. And it's. I mean, it was quite a few years since I started writing the book. I had a sabbatical when I was in Bielefeld for a year, and that was 17, 18. That was an important year when I started to write the main parts of the book. And I've been working on it ever since. But what I've done over the last couple of years is also to give a lot of courses on uncertainty reductions. The book has been developed in relation to the courses I offered. So many of the students have read various manuscripts of it in different stages of development. So they have also helped actually to improve the quality of the book by giving examples, asking questions, and so on and so forth. And the main point with the book is that, well, as you can hear from the title, it's about coping with the complex world. And the problem here is that people face uncertainty. And uncertainty is not necessarily something which is inherently bad. I mean, in my class, I typically ask the students, okay, if you're now uncertain, you don't know when you will die. If someone could tell you when you will die, will you know? Would you like to know this? Hardly anyone says yes. Most people don't want to know this. So it's not, the life is not about knowing everything, and certainly not knowing everything about ourselves either. So it's a much more complex issue, and it has these existential dimensions. But in the book, I still think that in many areas of life, we would like to reduce uncertainty, because the point, a central point of mine is that we cannot have perfect knowledge. And this is, of course, also what Frank Knight says. So what we can do is try to reduce uncertainty through various means. And the book is essentially about reducing uncertainty. And then you can do it as an individual. You may take steps on your own, you educate yourself, and so on and so forth, in order to make better decisions. And this type of individualized uncertainty reduction is quite well established and well researched in the literature. So my contribution is essentially to look at what I call the public uncertainty reduction, means that are available to everyone in the public and can be used by all of us to reduce uncertainty, which, so to speak, produced collectively and can be used by many of us. So in that sense, the idea is to complement the existing research, not necessarily criticize it, because, I mean, obviously, at the very end of the day, it's an individual, be it a single individual or a small collective, like in an organization, that makes the decision. And we draw on then both private available knowledge that we have, but also publicly available knowledge, which we share, so to speak.
So Patrik, tell us a little bit about this, what you say, how that knowledge, that public knowledge, it creates what you call, quote unquote, states of the world. Now, I've heard before about state of the art, for instance, to mean, the most modern, that's where, humanity is. You talk about these states of the world, and that they come about, like you said, not from private knowledge, but from public knowledge, where everybody, more or less, people say, that's how it is. That defines me and where I live. Tell us a little bit about that and where that comes about, and a little bit about the philosophers who started talking about that idea. I think you mentioned Nietzsche and Heidegger.
Yeah, Nietzsche, Heidegger, and Hannah Arendt and Habermas, they have all made various contributions to this idea of the publicness, that the public sphere is very important. That is the sphere which we share, and in which truth is established, and where we, so to speak, tacitly or explicitly come to agreement about what there is, so to speak. So, for example, the way we behave to one another is institutionalized. It means that we tend to behave to one another in certain ways, which we have learned from our parents, and they have learned it from their parents, and so on and so forth. So that we tend to behave fairly nicely towards one another, and so on and so forth. And this provides like the foundation of any social interaction, and that we we behave in such a way that we just don't think about it. It's just taken for granted. And this basic knowledge that we have of how to behave is a way I can rely on when I behave. I just don't have to think so much about it, but I can also rely on it in the sense that I expect you to behave in a certain ways towards me. So this is a shared knowledge that we have developed over time in the public, which all of us can use and rely on. And this is the kind of foundation for some type of certainty of how to behave and what we expect from others and how they will behave. And on top of that, we can build other layers of trust, because this is essentially what Hannah Arendt calls the foundation of certainty, is that I can trust another person. And yeah,
Patrik, so you, I believe it's been spoken about, has been discussed often in sociology, this idea that, like you said, when we're socialized, and we know, okay, you know, I treat my mom well, and I say hi to her, and I obey her, that this also helps. It helps us make, you know, kind of live okay. Because if we had to make a decision every time I thought I see my mom, and, you know, do I yell at her, or do I say hi, or that
yeah,
it makes life simple. It makes us able to live, because we kind of have everything. The road is already paved for us. We don't have to reinvent the wheel at every step, make a new decision, everything. We have those norms that kind of make everything work seamlessly, like you said. Otherwise, we'd go crazy with making all these decisions all the time. But you mentioned more this idea about how they create grown institutions, like you said, where that is part of our identity. And so that is where we kind of create the world by, like you said, knowing, okay, this is, you know, that's my friend, that's my enemy. I work doing that. And these grown institutions, like you said, they come about without us even really knowing.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is that we don't start from scratch, as you say. We inherit the world, and we learn how to behave in a certain way. And this, of course, is you may even say it's slightly, there's a conservative touch to it, in the sense that, I mean, societies tend to, institutions change not fast. They're fairly stable. Which means that some people say that an institution may last for hundreds of years, and it take 100 years to fundamentally change an institution. I mean, people tend to greet one another, to shake hands. I mean, here in Switzerland, everyone shakes hands, or used to do it before Corona. It was very kind of, whenever you met someone in the morning, you didn't just say hi, but you also said hi, and then you shake hands with the person once a day. So it was a lot of handshaking. And of course, this has disappeared completely since Corona. The question is, will such, and this is a radical break with a very, very long lasting tradition. And some people have insisted on this even after and Corona. So they continue to do so, but there is certainly a small minority. So the question is, will this reappear as solid as it used to be, or will it be, well, maybe it's not the best idea, because we know it will transmit infections anyhow. If it's not Corona, it may be another one. So it will be interesting to see. And my prediction was, if the Corona period, in the beginning, I was in the radio interview, and it was like, if it lasts for 2 weeks, I mean, of course, people will start to shake hands. But now it's 2 years since I talked about this, almost. And I think it's less likely that it will come back as strong as it used to come back. But I mean, I'm still open to see what happens. And these things are the states of the world which are so stable that we can rely on them. And when we make decisions, we rely on them, and it means that our decisions are likely to be fulfilled, so to speak. Our aims with what we do are likely to be reached if we have state of the world. And a lot of knowledge is of this type that we have learned over time, and people have accumulated knowledge. Our forefathers have accumulated knowledge, and science, of course, is the primary example of accumulation of knowledge that we can use when we build machines, tools, and so on and so forth. And language is perhaps, well, then the codified, the way of codifying all this in a fascinating way.
And Patrik, so in one of your books, more, how shall I say, bloody moments, you talk about the Inuits from Greenland being studied by a European man. And this man, your point is that he understood pretty much what the state of his world were, the grown institutions where he came from, because when he visited these Inuits, he saw what it was like when they weren't there. And coming from the Western society where we see as a virtue charity, to help out the weak, to protect the weak, to support those in need. This was the opposite. This was, like you said, like the researcher said in 1937, that when actually the grandmother would be sick, then they throw her into the ocean and say, "You're worthless, don't get us sick." And so, or they pretty much, even the wife would leave the man if she wanted to go with another man, or the man, if he didn't like her ironing, of course they didn't have ironing, but if he didn't like how she put his clothes together, then he'd leave. So tell us about this idea of the negative, like you said.
Yeah, I have this example. I thought it was fascinating to read classic anthropology. Of course, I mean, most of the studies are from the late, 1890s or so. But still, I think we can see traces of this still today in Greenland, where the family structure is disrupted, and it's a lot of problems with alcohol in society. So as you can see, this the problems that, so to speak, this society had facing the modern society and entering, because there was this lack of family structures and norms that kept it together and support one another. So it was very much like the kind of almost like Hobbesian world with harsh and brutal life, with a lot of fights and so on and so forth. And I think it's a good example of how a more developed or more advanced developed society with more institutions, grown institutions, as you mentioned, due to cultural refinement, has somehow managed to create a situation where uncertainty is decreased. Of course, there are a lot of kind of material conditions. Living on Greenland on the ice is obviously much harder than living where you can grow crops and so on. Where, I mean, this was a hunter-gatherer society, and of course, if you couldn't find food, there wasn't an alternative. Whereas in other areas of the world, you could certainly find and more alternatives. And of course, coping with the weather and so on and so forth made it very hard for them. But still, it's an example where it shows what happens when there is a lack of institutional structure and states of the world on which people can rely to reduce their uncertainty. Instead, they were facing a high level of uncertainty constantly, you could say.
Fantastic. Professor Lino Rivera of St. Mary's College of California has a comment. I think he's having trouble with his camera.
Yes.
So we'll just hear him. Hi, Lino.
Yes, I'm sorry that you cannot see me. My camera, I think I have to reboot the computer, so you cannot see me. Hello, Patrik.
Hello.
It's very fascinating. With regards to your comment, with regards to the handshake, my comment is that, usually I teach music and I require my students to attend the symphony performances, concerts. One thing that the COVID pandemic brought is that I cannot require that anymore, because people might be saying, I am uncomfortable going to a concert. I'm not vaccinated because, that is my choice, or for some health or religious reasons. So that has changed the landscape of the way I teach my classes. And I am wondering also, just like you, whether the handshake is going to come back after the pandemic, whether that same kind of requirement for the students to go to concerts will resume.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a country in Sweden where handshakes are less frequently used than in Switzerland. In Switzerland, it's quite extreme, I would say. I mean, not in a bad way, but it's just the level of handshaking is substantial compared to many other countries I've been in, and therefore there's a strong idea probably that this is the way it should be. And I have also met them. I have been shaking hands with quite a few during Corona. Not very many, but still some do it. And I think also what you mentioned, Lina, when it comes to teaching situation, what can we require from students? We try here in St. Gallen to really go back to physical present teaching, and that people meet in classroom, because I mean, being a business school or business university, we see that the informal institutions, that is not what we teach them directly, but what they teach or learn from one another, being present in classes, and the culture which kind of is promoted and developing at the campus when the students meet, and especially when they meet and learn from older students, is of tremendous importance. And it's one of the virtues or qualities that we actually offer them in addition to the teaching. But still, I mean, teaching is one thing that anyone can give a class on markets, I would say, but not everyone can, as a teacher, can implement the culture of such schools. So it's an important dimension, which we only indirectly can further, so to speak.
Lino writes, I totally agree, Patrik.
Yeah, I see. Thanks.
So continuing about the next topic in the book, which is decided rules. You say that other than grown institutions, which come about naturally and people don't even know are there, they're kind of unconscious, there are these decided rules where, for instance, a government makes a law and distributes that knowledge to everyone, saying this is the law, and if people go against it, then there's going to be, there'll be sanctions, there'll be something bad will happen, like a fine or something, and it's decided by people, one person for many.
Yeah, and I think it gets really interesting when one starts to put these together. Of course, you can imagine most countries around the world have a system of laws. They have a police force, military, but in some countries this doesn't really work practically really well. That is, there is one thing, the formal side of it, the decided rules are there, and there are rules and there are formal sanctions, what should happen, and that you should have access to this or that. But the informal economy is so present, and corruption may be so rampant, that you actually have to pay your way through the formal system. The only way to get to a medical doctor is to pay, although it is on paper something that should be available to everyone. So, for example, you have the formal rules are only reduce uncertainty if they are implemented. So it requires more than a discourse. It requires the practical side of it as well. That is, the sanctions are put in place, and I mean with sanctions I mean both positive and negative, so that those people who behave according to the rules should be in a way gain from it, or at least, I mean, in the sense of gaining the resources that they are entitled to according to the law, whereas those who don't should be punished. If they, and just disregarding exactly what the law is about, but that's the logic of a well-functioning legal system. So I think that's an important dimension, and of course, as a single individual, I can orient to the law, and I can read a book of law and see, if I do this, that happen, I can do this. And you can have help from experts who knows the law much better, but you can also expect that others operate under the same conditions as I do. But if you have a lot of informalities in addition to this, then you don't really know what others can use. If they can use a backdoor or a bribery or whatever to gain what they need, and you may have to do this. And of course, this increased transaction cost, increased uncertainty, and is a bad situation for all. So there is ways of, I mean, how the grown institutions, the virtues of people is fundamental for seeing or understanding how the formal structure, the legal structure actually works. If people misbehave constantly, it really doesn't matter what formal or decided rules you actually have.
And in the book, you give the example of how in Italy, in the north, they have rules that were pretty much made by people in the North. And when they transferred them to the South, it didn't work because the South had different grown institutions.
Yeah. I think we have a question here from.
Yes, we do.
Sister.
Sister Brian Latour, welcome.
It's interesting that sometimes children figure stuff out to benefit themselves. I remember I was teaching in a town where I had a boy in my class who was very smart, but he wasn't very athletic. And I don't know if you know what Sam's Club is, but it's a place where you can buy things in bulk. So the kid got his mother to buy him some bulk candy. And he came to school, and I didn't know this was going on until it was reported to me, but he would sell the candy for 25 cents a piece to the kids that he liked and that were nice to him. But if they were mean to him and they wouldn't let him play on their team, or they said some, kind of, you're nothing but a nerd to him, or some kind of a thing like that, they had to pay 50 cents. And I was always, I was the principal, so I had to deal with that. And I said to him, I'm amazed, and I commend you for your brain in figuring out what you want. He wanted less uncertainty for himself. He wanted to be sure of a place to fit in. But I said, it would be best if you continue to bring the candy to just charge the same price for all. So I didn't tell him he couldn't do it, but everybody had to pay the same price. But I mean, that kid was only 10 years old and he figured that out.
Mm. Yeah, it's a fantastic example. And I think it's quite common that people try to set up, because this is in a sense a rule. It is an attempt to create a system, create a rules for how to trade, and meaning that, and of course we see that all the time. We see it in China today, for example, that they have it's not identical, but it's a similar system where people who behave in a certain way get benefits. So you have this social credit system on a mass scale, and of course then you have the support, as it were, of a strong state, which everyone knows is in control of a lot of power and can have do whatever it wants, essentially. So you better behave. And of course, this boy didn't have this power, but it was an attempt still to create a change, and maybe perhaps as you indicated, mostly to his own benefit and to his own. But I mean, one could have talked about it in the class to see what is a reasonable thing to do. Is it reasonable? And I totally agree with you what you did, but it's still a good topic for discussion on how to implement rules and which rules should be implemented. I think for a school class, typically this is a good thing to learn, to teach children how can we set rules together, and what are the consequences for those who do not apply to these rules. For example, behave nicely to one another, because that seems to be the core of the problem here, not exactly the price of the candy itself. Is just a symptom for a more profound problem in the class, I assume.
Fantastic. So I would like to, because we're running out of time, move on to something called standardization, and how standardization of cucumbers in particular in the European Union was able to, as said on page 141, taken together the knowledge of what a cucumber, quote unquote, is clear, and many actors in the production chain can orient themselves to this standard, thereby reducing uncertainty for many. So I brought here to the show just a few cucumbers so that we can take a look at what they look like. Patrick, so you say in the book that they don't like this curve. They wanted everything to be straight. And
well, I think
curve,
it can be 10% bend is okay, but if I remember correctly.
So there we have another one. So these are, I believe, I tried to find the most distinct ones I could, and they all are pretty standard. This is a cucumber from a supermarket. So tell us about this standardization.
Yeah, it was a European attempt, and I mean, there's a long prehistory to it. But the idea was that by standardizing this product, which of course by nature is not standardized, it's just cucumbers, and we call them cucumbers, and they have been developing over hundreds of years, thousands of years, I don't know, in different places of the world. The idea was really to standardize them so that the supermarkets, I mean, the larger chains that were purchasing them could trade with them more easily. For example, transport, so that you could have packages, you could put a cucumber in a small box and so on and so forth, and thereby also make them more attractive, more similar for the customers, so that the customers wouldn't be overly surprised and reject some of the cucumbers. You had one with like color stains or whatever, it was white marks on it, which would then be downgraded. So the less of that they have, the more you can actually know the price. You can set one price, and you can know that people will buy it, and you can also then more in a more predictable way make profit in a sense. Of course, this uncertainty that is reduced for the chain and perhaps for the customers to some extent is then increasing the uncertainty for the farmers who grow the cucumber, because they can only sell the cucumbers that fit the boxes, so to speak, they fit the standard. So which means that when they have a lot of cucumbers on the ground, they can only perhaps sell 50% or 60 or 30%, depending on the cucumbers themselves. So for them, they know what they can sell, but they also know there's a price set. So if they get a lot of bent cucumbers or a lot of stains on the cucumbers, they know they can't sell them, and maybe they don't get either much price. So they have to throw them away or sell them for a very low price. So for them, the uncertainty thereby, in a sense, is increased. Maybe Jerry Davis has asked a question. I don't know if you want to take that as well, but it's fine with me anyhow.
Dr. Davis?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Before you spoke about handshaking in Switzerland, and I lived in Switzerland for a long time, and I agree 100%, Lausanne. And handshaking in the States was very common as well. Now, what I see people doing is they're putting their fists together and touching each other, or elbows.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd throw that out to add it to the discussion. Thank you very much, though.
Thank you, Dr. Davis.
Hi to Switzerland.
yeah. Thanks, Jerry Davis. It's a good point. That's certainly true that there are kind of replacements, but it's still a bit, as you say, there are more ways to do it, and it's always a bit uncertain what. Some people do the elbow, some say high, and some do the knuckles, and there are the different ways. So it's not just institutionalized, but it is what you say is really that the idea of some kind of touch, some kind of contact is that type of institution at the high level. It remains, but the concretization of it is still uncertain, so to speak. So it speaks in favor of the return of something. What something is still a bit uncertain, but the classic contact is probably there to stay in one way or the other.
You feel this togetherness, so to speak.
That's a good point.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the question.
So again, thank you, Dr. Davis. Again, the book is forthcoming, Uncertainty Reduction, Coping with a Complex World. If I found one thesis when I was reading it, it was on page 120. Uncertainty is reduced by knowledge that leads to social order. So there it is again, Uncertainty Reduction, Coping with a Complex World, forthcoming. So Patrik, can you tell us what's the future look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, I have a very long-term project, and it's called Being in Order. It was I set it up 2005 when I was working Max Planck Institute in Cologne, in Germany, and it's supposed to run until 2035. So it's a 30-year project, and I'm in the second half of it. So the next book will be on being, that is human being, what we are. In relation to order. So I've been covering order for in some books, and including this one. But it opens up towards the question of what we are and how we are constituted by living and being in an ordered society, and what this makes with us, so to speak. It's a very sociological approach to being, in contrast to the kind of inner worldness of psychology, for example. So, but it's not entirely attempted to replace it, but it's more, again, a complement and give this sociological version of identity, for example, and how this affects our being, what we are, and how we feel.
Fantastic. So let's see how we can stay in touch with Patrik. Here is the website, sfs.unisgallen.ch. So it's a Research Institute of Sociology, St. Gallen. And Patrik, how we can reach out to you just by writing to the contact?
Yeah, definitely. My email address is also on it's my name, patrik.aspers at the same address as you mentioned, and it's available online. So you're more than welcome to get in contact.
Fantastic, wonderful. So Patrik looks forward to being in touch with you. If you'd like to reach out to him, here I'll put in the chat room is the website again. So thank you so very much to Professor Patrik Aspers. I hope very much that you'll be willing to come on again to discuss more. There's actually much more about the book, unfortunately, that we couldn't get to. Also model photography and such. So I hope you'll be willing to come on again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Simon, for having me. It was a pleasure, and also thanks for the question. I very much appreciate those. Thank you.
So let's take a look at what is next week. Martin Rokeach, an oratorio for Oakland. Music may not directly inspire citizens to civil disobedience, but it sure seems that musicians are among the most vociferous opponents of quote unquote injustice anywhere. The Oakland Symphony, Youth Orchestra and Chorus, under the leadership of Michael Morgan, may be a case in point. The joint pursuit of justice and musical excellence defined his 30-year tenure. Among the final new music commissions he made is Bodies on the Line, The Great Flint Sit-Down Strike, a newly created oratorio by composer Martin Rokeach and librettist Rebecca Engel. The composer joins us to discuss his magnum opus, preparations for the work's premiere, and its contribution to the late maestro's legacy. As always, all information about upcoming shows is available at www.simeonmorrow.com. Again, that is next Wednesday, Martin Rokeach, an oratorio for Oakland. Once again, thank you so very much to Patrik Aspers. Thank you to Lino Rivera and to Agnieszka Rivole for her support of this show. Most of all, thanks to you, our participants, who make it all worthwhile. From St. Gallen, Switzerland, New London, New Hampshire, and the Bay Area, California, goodbye. See you next Wednesday.
Bye-bye.